All right, the other thing we can think about with our digital elevation models, so here we're looking at a digital elevation model as you would input it into your GIS. And we can see here we're looking at a 30-meter digital elevation model, meaning our cell size, each cell on the raster is 30 meters. The 10-meter DEM, which kind of adds in weird, but it does overlap. We can see these are going to be our 10-meter cells, 10 meters on each side. And lastly, we can add in our 5-meter DEM. So with each of these DEMs, these digital elevation models I just added in, we're looking at different resolutions. So each one, we got 5 meters, we got 10 meters, 30 meters. So let's look at some examples of the differences in resolutions. Oh no, you're going to see the answer. Hang on, let me pause sharing so you don't see the answer to the quiz. Okay. How do I resume share? Okay, we're back, I think. No? There we go. Now you should see it again. So you still can kind of see the answer. But these are two different resolutions from that data set that we were just looking at. Let me pop the poll up. You know I love a good poll. Which example has a finer or higher resolution versus coarser resolution? Go ahead and vote. Two holdouts that might be doing something else. But all right, there we go. Everyone got it right. So great. So you remembered that finer or higher resolution is going to be more detailed or more details. So we can look at this example on our left. This is our 2-meter data. On the right, we're looking at 10-meter data. So you can start to see the differences between the quality and the detail that you're getting. We can see on the left, we can see things like a lot more details of maybe roads or the very specific. Up here at the top, I like to look at these river channels. You can start to see some sort of channel on the 10-meter, but it's definitely not as detailed as the 2-meter. So here we're looking at that same data set that we were just looking at. And this is in Utah. This is just southeast of Salt Lake City, up by, I can't think of the ski area, but the ski area is there. So we'll look at it on a map and the answer will be there in a second. But so here we can see we have 30-meter. Let me move my menu bar a little. We have 30-meter, we have 10-meter, we have 5-meter, and we have 2-meter digital elevation models. So this is, again, each cell is representing the average elevation for that area. And they're very different levels of detail that you're seeing from left to right. What do you think? All right, let's launch this poll. The reason we're talking about this is usually, I'm not having you do the lab this year, but usually you do a lab where you're creating all these digital elevation models, and we'll look at how to do that in a second, and you're trying to figure out which resolution is appropriate for which uses. So you are contracted by a recreation company, and they're looking at a whole bunch of different map products, and your boss just wants you to put together some examples of what different levels of resolution would look like and what their best, how they would best be used for different outputs. So we're going to go to our next poll, 2 polls tonight. Nope, yeah, this one. So this one has a couple questions, and it's going to ask you which one you think would be most appropriate for a specific use. And it's always the same: 2-meter, 5-meter, 10-meter, or 30-meter. So take a couple seconds to answer these questions. First one's asking if you're looking for a DEM to design a new ski slope, which one do you think would give you the best ski slope, or would be the best resolution to help you design a new ski slope or map out that ski slope? And there's the other thing with this lab is there's no necessarily correct answer. There are better answers. But the idea is kind of thinking about all the things that go into making these decisions. not just in terms of what are you getting the best data, but what does the client actually need to use it for? So give you guys just another couple of seconds to answer it. All right. Oh, we got a question. Is it weird that the 5 meter says more fine? It seems more fine than the 2 meter. Not necessarily, because we can't really zoom in. I'll zoom in on these in a second and we'll start to see some of the differences. I get what you're saying. There seems to be a little bit more detail in some of the areas of the 5 meter. You can see those potholes. You can see like these, you know, what's happening here. You know, why is there more, it seems to be more elevation in this area. And it depends on your data. But when we zoom in a second, when we actually look at the data, you'll see that while it does look a little bit smoother, or maybe like they're less, I'm ending the polling, whoever's doing something else. You know, it may seem like there's less stuff going on, or it's not as smooth, but you're right. They're both, you know, pretty high resolution imagery and give us a really fine scale, fine amount of detail. We'll talk about some of the strengths and weaknesses between them, but we can see that we're sort of split on this first one between 2 and 5, maybe feeling that 5 looks a little bit smoother or better, or seems better, maybe 2, but that, you know, generally I was hoping you'd be in one of the finer resolutions for that one. Modeling the slope across the state, which DM would be best for modeling the slope across the state of Utah? Definitely leaning toward that 30 meter. Yes, you would be more accurate for the 2 meter, but one of the things we'll talk about is your data size and processing time. What is the coarsest resolution that you would choose to model streams or hiking trails? So it seems like we felt confident, definitely not the 30, you wouldn't be that coarse, but it seems like most people would pick 2 meters, and then there was a couple folks that thought maybe 5 or 10. I agree, you probably could go as coarse as 5 or 10. You could just stay on that fine scale with the 2. Oh, I thought there was a fourth question. That's okay. But you're seeing probably, as Steve noted, these aren't exactly straightforward questions to answer, that some thought needs to go into it. And one of the things that you have to remember that, like most things in GIS, there's no absolute rules for how to do this, or what the best resolution is. The best practice is, like kind of like we did, determine what you're mapping, what's of interest. Is it something that needs a lot of detail like ski slopes or hiking trails? Or if you're mapping the rivers, is it for flood control or just for general purpose mapping so people know there's a river here? Like how much detail do you need? Determine the largest resolution that's required to appropriately map the phenomenon, select it, make sure you have data that can be at that resolution. Because like I think I've mentioned in the past, you can always take your 2 meter data and sample to a coarser resolution. So if you have one set of 2 meter and everything else is in 10 meter, you can resample your 2 meter to be in the 10 meter resolution. You can't go the other way. You can't go coarser to finer resolution. So make sure you have the data. You know, you may want 2 meter data, but you can't get it. You only have 5 meter. And then resample all the data to be used so you're in that resolution that you selected. So unfortunately, no quick answer there. We can actually do this with that 5 meter data too. But you can start to see, why did I have this in here? You know, the different purpose, you can start to see some of the details, how they change between 2 and 30 meters. We'll look at the 5 meter data too, but with that 2 meter data, there's this little hump here, and we just created, you'll be doing this in one of your labs, creating a topographic profile, creating this line, and then creating the 2 graphs as if we would cut it in half. We can see here, we're looking at our 2 meter data, we've got our 2 meter graph, and just how different that looks on that 30 meter image. So you go from having a little bit of detail to just that straight downward slope. And I think, yeah. And that I put in there so the program wouldn't crash. But let's go back, I just want to show, to clarify. Okay, so let's turn on our 2 meter. We'll go into our study area. And let me turn this off really fast, and we'll turn on our swipe tool. We've got, let me turn off everything else. So we're just comparing the 2 to the 5. And let's see if it's gonna work for us. Hang on, I've got a toolbar in my way. So swipe. Oops, there we go. Okay. So this isn't actually what I want to be doing. Let's turn the Hillshade on. So it does, I think, at that distance give you, so we're looking at the 2 meter is the one I'm swiping on and off, and the 5 meter is the one I have turned on right now, or the one below it that Steve was saying it does look smoother. I think it does at some of those larger scales, and on the sort of one you can't really interact with, does look smoother or better. But when you start to really like zoom in on some of these flow areas, you can see that even though it's only 5 to 2 meters, the quality really starts to degrade. And we could turn on the 30 and you'll see that it's just, you know, so 5 meters still, you're getting a lot of detail, but it's not as detailed as the 2 meter, as you can imagine. So yes, at a distance at that slide, I agree that when I was looking at it, it's like, oh, this kind of looks the same, or, you know, it doesn't look that bad. And it's you know, the 5 meter doesn't look bad, but there is a difference. The 2 meter is a little bit better in terms of how much detail you can see. So you're probably thinking that these images on the slide looked pretty nice, and why doesn't that DEM that I'm showing you look like that? Well, these are how you are downloading. Oh, before I get to that, one more thing I want to show you about choosing your slides, choosing your cell size. So we talked already about the purpose of your project. That those bullet points did not talk about the power of your computer or the speed you need to complete your analysis. So let's open up the properties for our 30 meter DEM, and you'll see that this file size for the 30 meter DEM is about 50 megabytes, and it has about 3100 by 4100 columns by rows. So how many cells, you can multiply those two to calculate the cells. We can go to our 10, do the same thing. When we go to 10, we're going to about 147 megabytes for our file size and about 6,300 by 6,000 cell size. And that's again, just pulling it from our properties or layer properties. And I don't have the 2 in here, but we can go with the 5 meter data and see that our file size, by going to 5 meters, we're thinking again, 30 meters was about 50 megabytes. 5 meters is about 244 megabytes. So you're seeing a large file size increase, and we've got 8,000 by 8,000 cells. So yes, the shapes are different. You know, we've got slightly different sizes, but in this 5 meter image that we're looking at here, we have 8,000 by 8,000 cells, and it's 250 megabytes. So if you're doing the entire state of Utah, it's going to take a real long time, and your computers may start smoking if you are looking at that 2 meter cell size. So 30 meters something would be great for, you know, a county. I was trying to do an example in, where do we live? San Diego County, and it was, the 30 meters was still taking forever, so I ended up using 50 meters. But it's so something to think about with your final project, or how quickly you need to turn something around. 30 meters is going to take a lot shorter time to process. But if you need the amount of detail in a 2 meter, maybe think about a 5 meter, because it'll be a little bit faster. So that was the last thing I wanted to point out. You want to think about your purpose of your project, and think about the amount of time and the processing power of your computer. Now we can talk about how to make it look nice. This is what, when you download and import your DEMs, it will always look like this, these sort of weird tree roots or rivers or whatever you feel this looks like to you. So it's pretty straightforward to change the symbology. As you can imagine, we're just gonna go over to our Symbology tab and change that to a more appropriate color scheme. And if you've forgotten, you always can right click on the color bar there and uncheck the graphic value, and it'll give you the text interpretations. So I like to use this for the elevation ones. You don't have to, but it just makes it easier for me. Excuse me. And we'll see that we start to see a big difference. Nothing's changed in our values, but we can see some of these flat areas, some of the high points on the mountains, and some of the valleys coming through. But it still does look different than what we saw here. Oh, I don't have it turned on, so the reveal isn't good. But let's turn that off for now. Okay, so how do we get this 3D effect? One of the good things about the labs this week is that all of the tools you're using are not complicated. So unlike some of the past couple of weeks where you've been asked to do a lot of different things and set a lot of parameters and understand and have to try to figure out some of these tools, a lot of our terrain tools are the defaults work, or there's only one input you need to do. So Hillshade is how we get our 3D data, or how we get our DEMs to look like they're in 3D. So our Hillshades, if you looked in the Canvas page, you know that it's a, what are we looking at? We're looking at the incident of light on our surface. So it's just a measure of, does the sun hit this or is this in a shadow? So it's gonna look at each cell and decide if it's the sun is falling on it, if the shadow is falling on it, and what degree the sun is illuminating it. So this is, I always say this is just a cartographic design layer. I'm sure there are purposes for the Hillshade, but the reason I mostly use them is to make my rasters look nicer. So this is not, oh, don't freeze program. There we go. This is not, you don't really want the Hillshade layer in your legend. I mentioned this in Canvas. This drives me crazy. Because it's really just a cartographic tool. You do have some options. Like I said, there's just one or two options in the Hillshade tool to change the azimuth and the altitude. This is so you can adjust for things like seasons. Maybe you wanted to model how much sun or the shadows in winter versus summer. Maybe not as big of a difference here in San Diego, but somewhere like up in, what's north? Minnesota would have a different, have a bigger change between how much sun is on a place in winter or summer. And honestly, I never adjust these, so you would have to Google the season and what you would put in here for your area. I often check model shadows, but it still looks good if you don't check model shadows. So it's just the type of relief that it's generating. And then you hit OK. And I'm not gonna do that just because I'm afraid my computer will crash. And it will add this nice 3D interpretation of the raster data. So when we saw that in the Hillshade, we just left our Z factor as 1, meaning it's just multiplying your elevation by 1 to create the shadows and give it that look of relief. If you wanted to do something like model pollution, you could do that with your Z values, but for elevation, we can just leave it as 1. So you can see for each grid cell, it's just determining how much light's falling on it. So complete darkness is gonna be the darkest. 0, complete light is in that high value, that 255 or 54. So these are just values related to the grayscale and the black. So that's why they really don't need to be on your legend, because they don't mean anything to most people. You then add it under your DEM. Does anyone remember? So does anyone know how I would allow you to see something under this layer without turning it off, just by changing a setting in Symbology? Does anyone remember what that setting is? No thoughts. Transparency, points for Will. So we can go into our Symbology for our 30 meter DEM. We can go to our display. We can change that transparency. And you can start to see that it starts to give it that 3D effect. So we went from that totally flat looking image to something with a little bit more elevation. Sure, Steve. Yeah, right on the tip of your tongue. You also were going to say transparency. That's all right. Will wins. No points for Steve, just for Will. So this is sort of how I got to this final point that you see on this image. It's really, this lab, you would be downloading, converting a lot of data sets, making a lot of raster mosaics. And honestly, this is a lab that everyone hates the most. So that's why I didn't really feel bad getting rid of it. But it does give you some time to sit and really think about how the resolution changes and what different effect it can have and what you might use it for. The other thing you learn in this lab is that you can, just like in ArcMap, we can import the symbology from here, from our 30 meter DEM onto our 10 meter or 5 meter. Which one do we want to do? Let's do the 5 meter. So we can go to properties. We can go to that symbology, just like with, if you had a layer file in vector data, we can just import our symbology from our 30 meter data. The other thing we can do, which you'll notice that my high values still match my high values on my 5 meter. They haven't changed to my high and low values on my 30 meter data. With your raster data, you have one more setting if you want those high and lows to match and to really have your legends be the same. It's in here under statistics. Instead of creating statistics from each raster data set, so this one's creating it right now from that 5 meter data set. Well, actually, let me just, well, no, we're gonna go all the way through this. We can change the statistics to our custom settings, and we can just go ahead and import again, import our 30 meter DEM, which is north 41, okay. And you can see here that our max and min now match, our minimum and maximum now match the 30 meter data set. So when I hit okay, you'll watch it change up here. But it didn't change, so that's cool. Awesome, import from. It's worked before, so now I'm just annoyed. Oh, Lordy. All right, now they match. So I don't know, I just did it again. Or maybe I have to check on that edit high and low values, but watch the video back and figure out why it worked this time. But you can see that we have the same values. We can see that we can change our transparency. We would create our Hillshade for this one as well, but we won't for the sake of time. But you can see that if we were to compare, here, I'll turn the Hillshade off. If we were to compare these two values, we'd actually be comparing, excuse me, if we were to compare the two DEMs, we'd be comparing the topographic values, not the symbology. So any changes, any issues that you might have seen, like if we just change, let's just turn this on. Zoom out a little bit. Where's it? 10 meter. And we might not see a ton on here because the values are pretty close, but especially with like the 2 meter data, you would start to see a big difference between a lot of the symbology. So maybe completely different colors on either side of the line. So by having the same, whatever this is called, having the same symbology, setting the same high and low values, importing your symbology from one to another, you can avoid all of those issues and really know you're just comparing the terrain to the terrain or the cells to the cells. So